You know, basically since Endgame, it seems like people have been waiting in the wings to jump out and say that the MCU has failed. It's over. It's all crap now. Every movie and every show, except for Guardians 3, has been absolutely trounced with criticism that I think has been unfairly harsh. They've not been putting out masterpieces, sure, but Phase 4 was mostly fine, and they've even put out some things that I really love. When everyone jumps on a hate wagon, I have a natural tendency to get defensive. But unfortunately they're right this time, because this show is just awful. It's slow, boring, somehow too short despite feeling so long. It completely muddles any kind of political allegory it was trying to make. It completely fails to tell any kind of coherent story about its characters or with its plot, and it fails its own basic premise of being a spy thriller. It's a bad show. I had a bad time watching it. I'm not going to try and say this is representative of some creative decay within the MCU. All of these projects are handled by different creative teams. But I do need to talk about this show. Well, I don't need to. I want to. Dissecting why something is bad is fun, and it's been a while since I've had something this bad that I can really sink my teeth into. This isn't a review, it's more of an autopsy. We're not angry, we're not upset. We're scientists, so let's open her up and see how she died, shall we? If, like most people, you haven't watched the show, let me give you a brief overview. Nick Fury and his cast of variously fleshed out friends have to stop a gang of evil shape-shifting aliens called Skrulls and their boss Gravik from starting World War III and destroying all of humanity. Half of his friends die, one of them becomes a god, and then they prevent World War III but accidentally start a war against the Skrulls, who are mostly innocent bystanders, and then Nick Fury goes back to space with his Skrull wife. You might think that's a vast oversimplification, but honestly, not really. That should be more than enough to follow everything I'm about to talk about. The very fact that the plot is so easy to summarise is their first warning sign that something has gone wrong here. Secret Invasion is supposed to be, was clearly marketed as, and seems like it was trying to be a spy thriller, but it's missing all of the key ingredients to make a spy thriller, let alone a good one. A spy thriller requires a few key ingredients. Mystery. There has to be something that you, the audience, are trying to figure out alongside the characters. Intrigue. That mystery has to be something compelling to watch and to figure out. And third, and I would argue most important, paranoia. There has to be this sense that you can't trust anything or anybody. And that's the thing that Secret Invasion fails most spectacularly. The tagline for the show on all of the posters is, "Who do you trust?" And right there we've met all three of our criteria. We've got our mystery, who are the secret Skrulls? We've got our intrigue, what do they want and why have they replaced these people? And we've got our paranoia, who do you trust? The problem is that the answer to all of these questions is the first and most boring answer you can think of, and that's best demonstrated through the story implementation of Rhodey. So, Colonel James Rhodes, aka War Machine, has been a character in the MCU since the first film, although he looked a little bit different in his first outing. He is the only mainline Avenger in the show, which already from the outside means you as the audience assume that if anyone in the show is a secret Skrull, it's probably him, because he's the only pre-existing character and therefore the one who would be the most dramatic to be a secret Skrull, and by the end of episode 3 you learn that yep, he is. Here's the issue. Rhodey being a Skrull doesn't actually matter to the story of the show in any meaningful way, because he starts the show as an antagonist and stays that way the entire time, which deflates the entire purpose of making Rhodey a Skrull in the first place. The reason to bring in Rhodey is that he's a character we implicitly trust, and that our heroes will implicitly trust. But they don't, and we don't, because Rhodey is being a dick the entire time. He fires Nick Fury, he jokes about carpet bombing Slovakia, and just generally he is extremely out of character based on the Rhodey we've seen in the movies. There's no mystery surrounding this. Fury knows he's a Skrull within minutes of talking to him. And that's true of every single secret Skrull we see in the show. Most of the time we're introduced to a character with the reveal that they're a Skrull.
Well, now that's confirmed. Let's party, shall we?
Oh, look at him. He's not the one who's gonna have your wife scraping your purple goopy brains out of a carpet.
Fosworth, what have you done?
Just showing Director Weatherby's true colours. Come and look at that. Oh. Hello, Skrulls.
The audience is given way too much information to have any sense of paranoia or mystery. And since the characters always know who is and isn't a Skrull, we never have a scene where the character reveals some dangerous information and then dun dun dun, that person wasn't who you thought they were. The fact that the Skrulls are shapeshifters is almost completely irrelevant to the story being told. The first episode might fool you into thinking that's not the case. The introduction with the crazed conspiracy theorist and the reveal that Agent Ross is a Skrull is interesting. Gravik does pose as Nick Fury to trick Maria Hill, and he does this, which, ignoring the fact that this doesn't make any sense, is a neat scene that plays into the idea of paranoia, since everyone that Gravik transforms into is someone who Fury had seen earlier in the episode, implying that Gravik had been watching the whole time. But after that, it's never a mystery of who is and isn't a Skrull, to the point that the characters within the show never actually question whether the person they're talking to is the real person or not. When What's-His-Face from Black Widow shows up to give Fury some stuff, Fury doesn't question if that's the real What's-His-Face from Black Widow or if he's a secret Skrull. I mean, clearly he's never watched Temple of Doom. Fury never questions if his wife is his real wife or another Skrull pretending to be his wife, or if Talos is the real Talos. They don't have that scene where you ask old questions to determine if you're talking to the real person.
6 years ago, you brought a gift to my anniversary dinner on Rigel.
A Chateau Picard Bordeaux, which you said was too dry because your taste in wine is pedestrian at best.
Definitely Picard.
Scenes like this aren't just included for a bit of fun. They show that the characters involved are paranoid, worried that anyone they talk to could be an imposter, and they show some level of intelligence on the part of the characters.
We're all over the place. You two. It's not you. It's not you.
Simmons, it's me. What about you? Prove to me that you're not a frickin' robot, because it looks like you're malfunctioning.
No way to prove it. You won't know until they kill you. There's no way to know until they kill you.
The show establishes that the Skrulls could pass that test since they can copy the memories of the people into their own brains, but the fact that they have all that prior knowledge never actually matters, it never comes up, meaning the characters are justified in their lack of caution based on the simple fact that they never need to be cautious. It seems like it would be super easy to get a spy into the good guy squad except for the fact that the bad guys never try. It is very boring to watch, and it doesn't have to be. Let's get back to Rhodey. While it still would have been obvious that he's a Skrull, the show would have been infinitely more interesting if you cut every single scene confirming he's a Skrull until his death. If right up until the end we didn't know for sure that he's a Skrull, then at least there would be some lingering doubt in your mind. But instead of at the end Fury trying to convince the audience that Rhodey's a Skrull, we already know he's a Skrull, and the only question is if the president is stupid enough to fall for it. So, this is all kinda dumb. But you can make a spy thriller without shapeshifters in it, plenty of those exist. I don't know why you would make the show with shapeshifters in it, not about the shapeshifters, but sure, let's see how they did. Gravik's scheme is to start a conflict between Russia and the US which will spark World War III, lead to the extermination of the human race so that Skrulls can take over the Earth. So, what's his plan to do that? Because that's another important part of the spy thriller, the dangerous, multi-layered scheme to unravel. Well, he has spies in various positions of power in world governments, including the Prime Minister of the UK, the Secretary General of NATO, this guy who I assume is important, and a Fox News host. He then does a domestic terrorism in Moscow and blames it on an American extremist group called Americans Against Russia, with the idea that this attack will cause a rise in global tension, but not yet enough to start a war. The next step is to order a British nuclear submarine to launch a missile at a UN plane carrying diplomats, I think. It's unclear, but that plan is foiled by Fury and Talos. Then they try to assassinate the President of the United States while pretending to be Russian soldiers. But when that fails, Gravik changes the plan to say that it was Russian soldiers working with the Skrulls and tries to get the President to launch a nuke at his own base, which will start World War III because that base happens to be in Russia. It kind of seems like he's just making it up as he goes along, if I'm being totally honest. And when his guys start questioning his methods, he murders them all, so I guess that's settled. I actually have no idea how the British submarine and the UN plane factor into his Russia v American plan. It seems kind of unrelated, and that lack of connection and a clear path makes the entire show kind of hard to follow, because you have no idea what's actually important to pay attention to and what's not. For instance, the fact that half of the show takes place in Britain and that the Prime Minister is a Skrull seems like it should be very important. Sonya's boss and her boss's boss are Skrulls, but it doesn't matter, ever. After episode 3 we never see the fake Prime Minister again. That's mostly because Sonya doesn't matter, but we'll get to that in a bit. Gravik's plans being poorly thought out means you never get that Holmes-Moriarty back and forth where the heroes are trying to outsmart the bad guys, because none of the heroes' plans are particularly clever either. In fact, Nick Fury is basically never planning ahead, he's always reacting to whatever scheme is currently underway. This leads to several scenes where you as the audience start to outsmart the show, and that is extremely unsatisfying to watch. So, there's a mole in Gravik's group. It's Gaia, Talos' daughter, because she was on the bad guy squad, but then she learned that Gravik killed her mother, so now she's switched sides. Gravik is suspicious of Gaia because she's a very bad spy who's been too obvious, and so he goes to confront her, but she denies it. Then, in the next scene, they're in a car together when he gets a suspicious phone call about that UN submarine plane thing.
Yeah. Right on schedule. The UN plane will be at Neptune's coordinates, 2200 hours.
And then, when he gets out of the car and out of sight, Gaia texts that info to her dad. Now, you, dear viewer, are an attentive audience. You've seen a spy thing before. You know how this works. You've just been shown in the previous scene that Gravik suspects Gaia of being the spy. So, you think, aha, with that extremely obvious phone call, he has given her false information, and when Fury and Talos go to the wrong place at the wrong time to stop the attack, she will have accidentally revealed herself as the spy. Except, then it turns out that the information was correct, and instead of being revealed as the spy with a cool spy trick, it's because her dad shits the guy they were interrogating. So she has to break into the People Vault and download the guy's memories so they can get the passcode, which, as it turns out, is his own son's name. You probably could have guessed that one, Talos. The whole show is like this. Nothing that happens will ever surprise you. Whatever happens will always be the most obvious thing that could have happened. And that would be fine if the whole point wasn't to be a spy thriller, if the whole question of the show wasn't who do you trust. You always, at every single moment in the show, know exactly who you can trust. The show just doesn't seem that interested in telling the spy thriller side of a spy thriller. It's more interested in characters and long conversations about life and philosophy. So, let's see how it handles that side of things, shall we?
Good book.
It's a collection of poems. Raymond Carver. You familiar?
More of a history guy myself.
He's known for his brevity. I mean, some of his poems are just 3 or 4 lines, but they pack a punch.
When a show quotes poetry at you, that's when you know you're watching some serious television. This show has a fair amount of characters, and I want to touch on all of them because, without fail, every single character's story is either unfinished, botched, or just terribly boring. Let's start with the man himself, shall we? Nick Fury's introduction is emblematic of a writing problem with the whole show, which is that huge chunks of the story are left to the audience to simply infer. Fury was in space, on a space station, doing things, and he is depressed, and has been since Thanos snapped him out of existence. His story across the show is, in theory, how Nick Fury got his groove back, and visually it hits those beats. He starts the show looking like a sad old man and ends it looking like Nick Fury, but the journey from here to here is a straight line. There aren't any steps along the way that actually cause him to change. We join the story after the most important things have already happened, which is the recurring theme. We're told that Fury has spent the last 3 years being depressed on a space station, but we're only seeing him right now at the point that he's actually decided to do something. Nick Fury is different in this show, wildly different, so different that he feels like an entirely new character. But within the framework of the show, he starts as a sad old man trying to do the right thing, and he ends the show as a sad old man trying to do the right thing. It's never a question of if he'll do it, it's a question of if he's capable of doing it, which, since he's the hero of the show, of course he is.
I'm Nick Fury. Even when I'm out, I'm in.
And he doesn't need a character arc, he's never had one before now. It's just that the show keeps insisting that he's having one, even though he's not. The most obvious example of this is his promise to the Skrulls. Gravik's primary motivation is that Nick Fury promised to find the Skrulls a new homeworld if they worked as his secret spy network. And 30 years later, there's no new planet, and it seems as though Fury hasn't even looked. This sets up a pretty clear character flaw. Fury has failed the Skrulls. He was using them for years. This really seems like something that he'll need to reconcile before the end of the show, but he never does. He doesn't even face Gravik in the end, he sends Gaia. And the show never condemns or exonerates Fury for using the Skrulls. He's never forced to reckon with his actions. It's just left entirely open-ended. It's a fundamental flaw in the way the character is written. The show can never decide if Nick Fury is a pure 100% good guy who would never intentionally manipulate the Skrulls, or if he's the shady do-whatever-it-takes kind of guy who would. And instead of committing to one or the other, it just makes it so that he never has to. And the result is a character who is extremely nebulous, which is not great for your main character. His arc is punctuated by the death of his two closest friends and allies, but he never really deals with any guilt or feelings of failure because of it, to the point where I'm not even sure why they bothered in the first place. For example, Maria Hill is in this show, technically. She shows up in the first episode, then Gravik shoots her and she dies. Then in episode 2, her mum yells at Fury about it. Maria Hill's death is a textbook example of fridging, which if you don't know is a reference to an old Green Lantern comic where poor Kyle Rayner's girlfriend is killed and stuffed in his fridge. It's a particular trope in a lot of media, but especially comic book media, where a woman is killed or depowered for the sole reason of motivating a man's story. In this case, Fury.
Someone wanted to hurt me, so they hurt her.
Maria Hill has only ever existed in orbit around Fury. She's never been a particularly fleshed out character, so instead of using this show to flesh her out, they use her death to raise the stakes. That's a little bit lazy and very unfeminist, but then the most crazy part of it is that her death doesn't actually matter at all. It does come up later. Rhodey uses his security footage to try and blackmail Fury, but then he leaks it anyway and nothing actually happens. There are no story consequences from the security tape leaking. It's a total non-issue to Fury, even though he seemed really worried about it at the time. Ultimately, her mum is right. She died for nothing. Speaking of which, Talos is Fury's other close friend who dies, and it's for equally meaningless reasons. A lot of Talos' deal is more closely linked to the political allegory mess that we'll get to in a bit, but for his own personal journey he has a lot of the same writing problems as Fury. We're once again joining the story after the most important things have happened. The last time we saw Talos, he was the unquestioned leader of his people. Now we join him and he's become a social outcast of the Skrulls. His wife is dead and his daughter has defected to the bad guy squad. The lack of any of this on screen makes the emotional weight of these tragedies much harder to follow. When Talos tells his daughter that her mother died, we don't feel that loss because we barely knew his wife, let alone her relationship with Gaia. This scene is also where we learn that Gaia didn't know she died, and apparently Gravik killed her, somehow, in a way that Gaia never knew about and nobody ever asks about. The gravitas of Talos is entirely on the shoulders of Ben Mendelsohn, who's bringing his A-game, there's absolutely no denying that. But once you get beyond his acting, there's really not much there. He's a dad who wants to get his daughter back, and when that's happened, he's served his narrative utility, so he dies, sacrificing himself to save the president. A sacrifice that's ultimately meaningless in a way that could have had some narrative weight because the president entirely ignores it, but it just doesn't because, like Maria Hill, his death has no impact on Fury in any way. His death isn't what motivates Fury to get back into the fight. Fury was already in the fight. He witnessed the death of his oldest friend, makes a shocked face, and then drives away. Fury doesn't even mention it in his last call with the president. Despite being established characters, these deaths have almost no emotional impact because our main character doesn't react to them in any meaningful way, and they ultimately have no impact on the story. There's never a moment where something could have been easy if Talos was still with us because his daughter immediately steps up to fill the exact same narrative role. Which is a problem because Gaia is maybe the least interesting character in the show. Her whole deal is that she doesn't agree with her dad's idealism and that's why she joins the bad guy squad. But then within the first episode, she's already come around to the murdering innocent children is bad actually side of the debate. Just like the rest of the show, there's never any drama surrounding Gaia's true loyalties. She's working for the bad guys for literal minutes of screen time before having a redemption arc. Except, because we've never actually seen her do anything bad, it's less of a redemption arc and more like she's an angsty teenager who ran away from her lame dad and joined a cult, only to realise that they were actually serious when they were talking about murdering all of humanity. Mostly what she does is stand around making that one face that Emilia Clarke always makes. It's Gaia who ends up becoming a god and killing Gravik, an action that's supposed to have weight because she's avenging her parents. But from every single scene together, we never get the impression that she cared much for her dad, and we never saw her interact with her mum even once. So it's a revenge that the audience doesn't actually feel. She ends the show taking the mantle of leader of the Skrulls, but that's never something she expressed interest in, or really any leadership skills whatsoever. I guess she gave my man Beto some fruit. That's nice. Hey, what happened to that guy again? Top tier leadership there. It's less a natural conclusion to her character as it is a, well, we need someone to be in charge and you're basically a god now, so I guess it's you. She makes exactly the same deal that her dad did, which apparently caused all of this to happen in the first place, demonstrating that she's learned absolutely nothing from this entire ordeal. I just want to chime in here and say I feel very bad for Emilia Clarke. Ever since Game of Thrones, she's always cast in these absolutely boring, thankless roles as lady who skills at people. Whenever you see her in interviews and stuff, she seems really fun and cheery and bubbly, but all we ever see of her on screen is these blocks of wood trying to capture that Khaleesi magic. And I'll just reinforce generally that the actors are not the problem here. This show has some of our greatest living actors in it. Samuel L. Jackson, Olivia Colman, Ben Mendelsohn, Don Cheadle. The fact that they had this caliber of actor and the show still turned out so bad is really quite an achievement. If Gaia is our most boring character, then Priscilla/Vara is our most pointless character. Priscilla is Nick Fury's wife. She's a Skrull. And that's all you need to know, really. The revelation that Nick Fury has a wife is one of those reveals that feels important but actually isn't. He has a wife. Good for him? It's hard to tell what they were even going for with Priscilla. It seems as though you're not supposed to trust her. And when it's revealed that she's working for the bad guy squad and is sent on a mission to kill Fury, you're meant to genuinely think that she might do it. But like every other mystery, we're given way too much information for that to be believable. We see the entire conversation where she gets the mission and she's trying to convince them that killing Fury is unnecessary. And we never get the sense that she cares about the politics of this situation at all. In fact, it's never made clear why she was even working for the bad guys in the first place, or what she was even doing for them. Just like Gaia, she has no redemption arc because the first time we see her is the time that she's already decided to leave the bad guys. There's also this really weird subplot about her questioning if Fury would love her if she appeared in her real form. It comes up several times, and it's just like, of course he would. Why wouldn't he? The resolution of that, Fury kissing her in her Skrull form, is supposed to represent the reconciliation of their marriage, since they end the show leaving together, but based on everything we're shown, their marriage is fine, or at least as fine as a marriage between two spies can be. The resolution has no weight because the problem was never shown to us to begin with. I'm starting to feel like a broken record here. This seems quite basic. In order for things to be satisfying, things need to happen. For a story resolution to work, there has to be a story. Don't worry though, we do hit the full spectrum of problems with Sonya, who has only story and no resolution. Sonya is by a country mile the best character in the show, and that's for one major reason. Olivia Colman is very funny and absolutely steals every single scene she's in.
Get out.
Oh, this is quite the clerical error. Nigel, we're going to have someone in admin either fired or, shot, because this is becoming a bit of a health hazard.
No, my name's Victor.
No, of course you are. Nigel's the one with his silencer pressed against the base of your skull. Ooh, there he is.
That charisma might disguise the fact that almost everything that Sonya does in the show is entirely irrelevant to the actual story. Sonya is some kind of British Secret Service agent who's also after the Skrulls. In episode 1, she kidnaps Nick Fury to have a chat, and then in episode 2, she interrogates one of the captured bombers from that domestic terrorism, who tells her about the scientists working on a machine to turn Skrulls into Super Skrulls.
Super Skrulls.
In episode 3, she gives Fury some info about the captain of that submarine and reveals that her boss, who we've never met beyond a quick glance in a Zoom call, is apparently a Skrull. She isn't in episode 4 at all, and then in episode 5 we open with her shooting her boss in the knee, getting the location of those scientists, and then capturing those scientists and their research. And then we never see the scientists again, and Sonya never actually sees the Super Skrull machine in person. Instead, she helps Nick Fury stop Skrull Rhodey from starting World War III. More than any other character, Sonya's story screams of massive reshoots and loss in editing. Clearly, there's a version of this show where Sonya has an entire subplot revolving around these scientists that presumably had something to do with the ending. But the entire ending was changed, making that subplot largely irrelevant. That should really mean that Sonya probably should have been cut from the show entirely, but since she's the only entertaining character in the show, they didn't want to do that. So what we get instead is a highlight reel of her best scenes from that previous cut that don't really have anything to do with the plot, but they are at least entertaining scenes. To me, the biggest sign of reshoots is this scene in the finale, because it feels incredibly out of place. As part of the ending montage, we see Sonia and Gaia discovering a massive room full of people in pods. But this is after Gaia freed all of the people, which I guess means she just forgot or didn't know that there was thousands of people down here. But I'm pretty sure that these are actually two different scenes that have been spliced together in editing. Sonia and Gaia aren't ever in the same frame, and when we see Gaia's perspective, Sonia and her goons are suddenly not there. Plus, Gaia is wearing the same outfit she was in the final fight, not her bin bag jacket that she was wearing in the previous scene. Because all of the scenes where Sonia actually figures out that people or Skrulls have been cut, she inadvertently comes across as ridiculously competent, like she has Skrull vision and just knows things.
Oh, hello, Skrulls.
Which is why when it's revealed that she didn't know that Rhodey is a Skrull, it's really jarring, because since everyone else knows and she's known about all the other Skrulls, you just sort of assume that she must already know that Rhodey is a Skrull. Why wouldn't she? She knows everything else. It's pure speculation, but I guess this entire sequence in the hospital is a reshoot that wasn't in the original version of the show, which presumably had all of the main characters converging on the Skrull compound in a different way. Which leaves Sonia's whole deal completely disconnected. For the vast majority of the show, she's basically in her own different show that we didn't get to see the finale of. Alright, we've got one more character, but he's a big un, our main bad guy. Gravik. Gravik is a villain who starts off strong, but over the course of 6 episodes becomes one of the most generic and boring villains that Marvel has ever produced. He starts as a villain who has a point. As mentioned, he feels betrayed by Fury for never finding them a homeworld and using them. But because his plans are so haphazard, he very quickly falls into just becoming a raving lunatic who wants to murder all of humanity because he's the bad guy. He starts episode 5 by murdering one of his own guys, an action that's supposed to show how dangerous he is, but actually serves to just make him, and by extension all of the Skrulls, look like massive idiots. It's the point where his character loses any power that he might have had, where he goes from the calm and collected leader who's always in control and one step ahead, to another angsty teen who hates his dad. This could signal a kind of power reveals type moment where we see that Gravik never truly cared for the movement and this was always just about petty revenge. But the show never even commits to that. Even when he's killing his own men, the show still wants to pretend that he has some kind of point. We'll get to that point in a bit. In his final confrontation with Gaia pretending to be Fury, he gives this impassioned speech about how he got the face that he uses. How it was the first man that Fury sent him to kill, and how that's what broke him and made him a heartless monster. Kingsley Benadire is acting his heart out trying to make this scene work and have any emotional impact, but it's way too late and way too many murders later for it to have any impact. Who this face was never even a question until this scene. His plan is literally to wipe out humanity. Why should we care that he murdered one guy 15 years ago? Gravik falls into the trap of so many Marvel villains of the last few years. He has a point, but he's the bad guy, so he kills thousands of innocent people so you don't have to think about that point in any meaningful way. The politics of this show are a jumbled mess of images and allegories that coalesce into soup. The show has no clear idea and absolutely nothing to say, in a way that's honestly kind of dangerous, in a way that I really hope wasn't intentional, and it all comes down to the way that the Skrulls are framed. Captain Marvel established the Skrulls as innocent refugees fleeing a war against an imperialist regime, and now they're the bad guys. Already some alarms are going off there, but let me just assure you, it's so much worse than that. The show begins by establishing our two different Skrull philosophies on humanity. On one side we have Talos and his idealism. Talos believes that by being good neighbours, helping out the humans and showing that they're the good aliens, humans will accept them and give them a home.
Gaia, we're a people without a planet. We depend on the goodwill of our hosts. We just have to keep showing them who we are. We just keep contributing. Show them our hearts. They will see us.
Gravik is a pessimist. He believes that humanity is cruel and wicked and that our history proves that racism and prejudice will mean that the Skrulls will always be rejected by us.
I quite like dogs. In fact, I prefer them. Dogs aren't hypocrites. And they don't lie. They don't lock each other up in cages. They don't pimp, poison. And they don't go out of their way to degrade and destroy their own habitat.
The show ultimately comes down on the side of Gravik. Humans suck. The president declares war on their entire species and inspires hate mobs to start gunning people down in the streets. But this presents a very obvious question. If Talos is wrong because his idealism is wrong, and Gravik is obviously wrong because his plan is to commit genocide, what are these refugees supposed to do? What is the right way to be a refugee? Both Talos and Gravik are dead, and we're left with Gaia, the one in the middle, who doesn't agree with either of these extremes. If the show was well structured, then she would be the one with a solution to this problem. But she doesn't. She just does the exact same thing her dad did with someone who's even less trustworthy. We have a problem, terrorism made it even worse, and now the solution is to keep doing the same thing that already wasn't working, only this time it probably will work. The most baffling detail of all is in the phone call at the end the president says, "If you care about the Skrulls, get them off my planet," because he's an alien racist. And then we reveal that apparently that's actually Fury's plan, since he's going to negotiate a peace talk with the evil empire that was hunting the Skrulls in the first place. The show does a lot to try and link the problems and prejudices of the Skrulls to previous human issues, particularly racism and segregation of the 1960s. Fury gives a whole little diatribe of his time as a kid taking trains where he and his family were forced to sit on the coloured carriage.
Coming out of Alabama, we always had to ride in the color car. It was hot, sweaty. Bathroom didn't work half the time. We couldn't go in the dining car. So we brought fried chicken, white bread, deviled eggs, pound cake, and a shoebox.
The scene is supposed to be, I think, somewhat of a callback to a scene in The Winter Soldier where Fury talks about his granddad's job as an elevator operator.
You ever get mugged?
Every week some punk would say, "What's in the bag?"
What would he do?
He'd show him. Bunch of crumpled ones and a loaded .22 Magnum. Granddad loved people, but he didn't trust them very much.
The difference between these two scenes is that one of them has purpose and meaning, and one of them doesn't. Fury's story about his granddad isn't just a story. He's explaining his worldview to Steve. He's explaining why he does things the way he does. Because he's seen firsthand the worst of humanity, and he's got his own .22 Magnum that he's about to show Steve. Steve trusts in the goodness of humanity, Fury doesn't. That's the conflict of the movie. Steve's greatest generation idealism versus the cynicism of the modern world. Can he keep that idealism in the face of all evidence to the contrary? Here on the train, the scene just does not have that kind of thematic resonance. It's much longer, includes much more detail about the kind of food they were having and some girl that Fury was having a fling with. But the point of the scene is to get to the tell me something I don't know game where Talos reveals that there's 1 million Skrulls on Earth. A fact that barely matters to the plot in the end. While they're trying to draw a parallel between Fury's own struggles against discrimination and the Skrulls, there aren't actually any parallels to be made. Until the very end of the show, most people on Earth don't even know that the Skrulls exist, and those that do are their allies. Skrulls aren't discriminated against. You can't be discriminated against if nobody knows you exist. Until the very end of the show, everything that the Skrulls are talking about is purely theoretical. Talos thinks the humans will be accepting, Gravik thinks that they won't be, but neither of them are talking from personal experience. The fact that they are shapeshifters makes any kind of allusion to racism or immigration or prejudice really, really hard, especially when you're flirting dangerously close to the old anti-Semitic reptilian overlords ruling the world conspiracies. There's 1 million Skrulls on Earth. Where are they? What are they doing? Do they agree with Gravik? Disagree? Do they even know he exists? Beyond our main characters and 15 nameless NPCs around Gravik's compound, the Skrulls are entirely theoretical as a race. We know they've established a council that's apparently controlling Earth politics and, as they say, maintaining stability. But then, why is Gravik mad? What changed? Because it seems like things are going fine for the Skrulls. I mean, they can't live in their true form, but that just kind of seems like they've never tried before. It's beyond the scope of this show, but this isn't even new for the MCU. There's already a colony of alien war refugees living on Earth. They have Thanos-themed ice cream. It's just a big mess. There's no clear idea of what the Skrulls are supposed to represent. They just represent something condemnatory of our modern systems. And as if it wasn't undercut enough, then we get to the big dumb ending where 2 space gods punch each other with every asset they have from the MCU. The finale of Secret Invasion currently sits at a staggering 7% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's the lowest thing that Marvel has ever produced, including The Inhumans and Howard the Duck. Now, I don't think it's that bad, but it's pretty bad. The core idea of a finale is that it's final, and the finale of Secret Invasion fails to wrap up anything because of the reasons we've well established by now. There's nothing interesting to wrap up. So instead we literally end on the exact thing that She-Hulk was making fun of. Two people with the same powers punching each other because of magic blood.
This is the story that Kevin wants.
I've poked fun at the big dumb fight a few times now, but let's really drive the point home, shall we? This fight is dumb. It's everything that people have been complaining about in the MCU for the last 10 years, and it's coming right at the end of a show that promised to be something different. Nick Fury gathered a bunch of superhero blood from the end of Endgame, and Gravik wants it so that he can become the most powerful person in the universe. The effects look fine, movie quality, but the creative decision behind the fight is so misguided. This show didn't need a big anime punch-up between two space gods. It's an admission of failure that the entire premise of the show has gone belly up, so here's some big booms and pretty lights and references to better things to keep you entertained. The shot of Emilia Clarke with Drax's arm has already been memed to hell and back, but it's totally fair game. Like, why does it even have tattoos? Are his markings genetic? Skrulls are already super strong, so why does transforming into Drax's arm help with that? And why Drax when you've got the Hulk in there? Why does Gravik become a big muscle man but Gaia stays as Emilia Clarke? Is it because she's too pretty to leave under all that makeup for more than 5 seconds? It's just dumb. There's no better, more eloquent way to put it. The whole thing is dumb as balls from start to finish. The finale comes, lots of people have died, but everything is exactly the way it was. Fury started in space, he ended in space. The Skrull started being used by a shady spy, and they ended being used by a shady spy. Nothing has changed, no problems were solved, and you're left wondering why you even bothered watching in the first place. There were no secrets, and barely even an invasion. I don't think we'll ever learn exactly how Secret Invasion happened. I think conceptually it was a bad idea from the start, especially to do it as a 6-episode TV show, but it goes beyond that. This show reeks of studio intervention, of 100 different voices trying to make themselves heard, and the result is a cacophony of nonsense. One thing I haven't talked about yet is this god-awful intro. The show's intro sequence was made using AI generation, and I twigged immediately because it looks like garbage. Just these big green meaningless blobs in that uncanny AI way. The creative team have said that this was intentional, that they were invoking the images and idea of AI art to be resonant with the themes of the show. Skrulls replace us just like how AI is threatening to replace us. Well, here we are at the end of the show, and it turns out that that defense was all smoke and bluster. Being replaced has nothing to do with the themes of the show in any way, so even if it was an artistic choice, it was still a bad one. The release of this show happens to coincide with a joint strike from the Actors and Writers Guild, who, along with a bunch of other points that are valid but I won't get into here, are worried about being replaced by AI. A story came out that some of the studios were offering background actors one day's pay to get their likeness scanned, and then they get to use that likeness for the rest of eternity, permanently replacing them with a digital simulacrum of themselves. And whether intentional or not, this show's use of AI feels like a statement. Not a statement to us, but to the people who made the show and the people who are in it. We can and will replace you. I've been quite harsh to this show, and there are some people who will make jokes like, the writers don't deserve to be paid when they're making trash. And that kind of talk really pisses me off. Writing is a job, just like any job, and you still deserve to be paid a living wage even if people don't like it. I am sure nobody is more upset about the state of this show than the people who worked on it. Trust me, as an artist, no one is a bigger critic than yourself. Secret Invasion is bad, but bad things and failure are an important part of the creative process. And I can still find plenty of joy in a bad thing. I think I just spent like 40 minutes making that clear. AI may never have that kind of failure. Failure, after all, requires intent. But that's why, in a strange sort of way, I value Secret Invasion. It is an intrinsically human piece of art. So I guess what I'm saying is, pay your writers, even if they're shite. Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. If you'd like to see your name up here or get access to exclusive Patreon videos, please consider signing up, it would mean a lot to me. If you're into long dissections of TV shows and why they're absolute failures, then you're probably going to love this video about Star Trek Picard Season 2. Or if you're looking for something completely different, why not look into why this cat is bad and how it's ruining the Xbox marketplace?